Hello everybody. Cameron, Samantha, Nolan, Stephen, Tanya. Hello, hi.
Hey,
Cameron, I'm sorry, I just was on the road all the time. But we'll
no,
make it.
no, no
If you
worries.
can you stay to the end of the session today? All right, then we'll schedule something at the end. Uh, okay, great. So let's get started. This is actually one of my favorite sections. This thing on autopoiesis. It has some forbidding terminology, but it's actually quite fun once we get into examples. Okay, so let's see. Yes, okay, we're on. So uh, like I said in the module, I think in the intro, if you this section has to do with the question like what is life, right? Little questions like that. First of all, I just want to do a check. Have any of you had a chance to look at least skim the Maturana and Vedanta yet? Yes, I see some nods. Good, good. Okay, good. Um, and I'll assume that Nolan and Stephen, you're somewhere in between nod and shake. Okay, but not to worry. I think we'll just use our hour today to go to just a few paragraphs that kind of at the heart of what they're talking about. But I want to warm up by first asking everyone what you would say, how you would answer this question if in a non-technical way, if somebody just wanted to ask, like a kid, right, might ask, what's the difference between a living thing and a non-living thing? You know, so maybe we can just put some things into chat, some hallmarks into chat to start with. So how would you respond? You know, what characterizes a living thing? Oh wait, let me turn on volume. Okay, go ahead.
When I was younger, I I think that I would say that living things breathe.
Let's just throw them on the table. Will to survive, breathe. What else?
Well, the question of viruses is disputed. All life has DNA. All life that we know of has DNA.
DNA. Whoops, DNA, not NDA. DNA. Okay, keep going. Wait, DNA for what does the DNA do for life? What's it for?
It's a information storage and processing uh, system and regulates uh, what is it like amino acid construction? Is that the next step up?
And then that's at the detail level. But then functionally, you know, even if we didn't know anything about the molecular structure of DNA and how DNA expresses into proteins, if we didn't know that level, okay, just functionally, what does it do for plants and animals? You know,
DNA gives us it defines what be what the life form is and becomes.
let's just capture that. Let's move on. And then what? And then what else? No,
Are you
distinguishing.
are you getting at that DNA is like it's really important for like reproduction and passing on genes from individual to individual?
So let's just say reproduction of the species, reproduction of the species. Somebody else should type, I'm not fast enough. Okay. And in fact, you see, I mean, it's kind of circular because species is defined by DNA, so you know it goes in a loop. But let's leave it for that reproduction of the species. Okay, that's good enough. So what other what are some other hallmarks of living systems? Okay. Versus non-living things. I mean, I'm looking around me, there are lots of examples. Non-living thing, non-living thing, right? Um, this is a lot more complicated. A lot more complicated. I say it's a non-living thing, all right? But it has software in it, has code. Does this reproduce? Okay, here. Does this phone reproduce itself? And is there anything in this phone that reproduces itself? Oh wait, Stephen, are you saying this what I'm holding here, this iPhone has the ability to evolve, or are you talking about life? Life. So the phone doesn't evolve, but engineers refine the design and have subsequent generations, so to speak, of smartphones. But it takes a lot of resource and engineering and design thought to evolve this thing. So that's interesting. That gives us a little bit of a hint between distinction between what Maturana and Varela think of as like autopoietic organisms and other kinds of things like a car factory. They call those things allopoietic, but that's their jargon. But let's keep going. So ability to evolve, okay. Can we say more about what evolution means then? Ability to evolve without using DNA, without using DNA as a kind of the mechanism. Just what does that mean for evolution? Okay.
Well, without DNA, it's really hard to talk about evolution.
Oh, sorry, I didn't mean that. I mean
Oh, okay.
without referring to DNA, without referring to DNA, just
Okay.
like functionally, what's going on functionally.
With evolution.
But yeah, because after all, I mean, Darwin had already had a theory of evolution before he knew about DNA, right?
Evolution is a process that allows a species, so in the reproduction of itself, the living can change in response to the environment, what's happening around it.
Yeah, basic thing. This is across generations. An individual organism within its own lifetime, right, also does this, right? It also changes its form, its behavior, even its metabolism in response to its environment. That's called living, right? Living being. Now let's push it a little bit. So if we have a rock that just sits there, like a boulder that came down in an avalanche, and it erodes over 10,000 years, 100,000 years, it's responding to precipitation, to ice cracking year after year. So maybe let's refine this a little bit. When we say the organism is is changing in response to its environment, can we say a little bit more about how that's different than the rock just eroding? Can we say a little bit more? Anyone? Think of a cat. You have a pet, or or you yourself, or a kid, a niece. Versus this glass. I mentioned yesterday, you know that glass is not a crystal. I mean, if you just let this sit for 100 years, well, maybe a bigger one. The window behind me, which is made of glass, can't see. If you let that window sit, come back in 100 years, you know what's going to change in that pane of glass over 100 years? You know what happens to glass when when in a pane of window when it just sits there for 100 years? Anybody?
Does it break?
Well, if it doesn't break, it still will change. I don't know if how many of you have actually gone to like a ghost town in in the Rockies or headed over from Nevada to California. There's some ghost towns or any old building with a 100-year-old window. There you go. Nolan wrote it. Thank you, Nolan. Glass isn't a crystal. It doesn't just stay the stick fixed form. It will sag. So if you look at a really, really old pane of glass in a window that's hundreds of years old or 100 years old or so, it's a bit thicker at the bottom than at the top. It's like very slow molasses. It's pretty amazing, actually. Okay, so, but that's, I wouldn't call that, however, I wouldn't call that like a response to the environment in the sense that a living organism responds to the environment.
Well, it's like the difference of acting or being acted upon.
Hmm. Hmm.
Right? Like,
Very interesting.
Can we bring in homeostasis?
Can you say more about that,
That that there's some type of state or bounded state that the system, i.e. life, is trying to maintain itself within, and it will adapt to external environments such that it maintains that narrow set of states. I mean, I'm kind of cheating because I'm pulling from the reading, but
Well, in fact, it's about time to bring in some of the Maturana and Vedanta. So it's absolutely legitimate cheating. It's called referencing the reading. So yes, of course. And then, okay, now I'm going to show, well, I think I have one. Almost every room with air conditioning has this. So you saw this, right? Thermostat. I think maybe I described it already, right? Every place that has the air conditioning or heating has such a device. Somebody want to explain what this does? I mean, just not in detail, just functionally.
it turns the heat on if it's too cold in the room.
So this set temperature here, right? You set the threshold. So did I describe this kind of basic cybernetic system before? Remember I drew that on the whiteboard. Okay, so here it is, a real life, a working one. Right, so this combination of a sensor, the temperature sensor, set point, connected to electricity, connected to heating or cooling elements, right? This is the simplest example of a cybernetic system. It responds to the environment. It does this kind of homeostasis that Cameron was talking about, right? This is a mechanical version of homeostasis. Okay, so we're getting somewhere. I mean, mammals are warm blood, so-called warm-blooded animals, mammals, we maintain our blood temperature, a body temperature, through a much more complicated set of mechanisms, right? So if it's a bit too cold, we shiver, we eat, we get hungry, we eat food, we metabolize, we generate energy, generate heat, etc. Okay. So, but that's one element, and that's going to head us toward the Maturana and Vedanta characteristic. So what's different between maybe a thermostat and an air conditioning unit in a room and a mammal? I mean, there's some more. Okay, can we just go a little bit more deeper into that? What makes the animal somehow more I don't want to say alive, more persistently self-reproducing, resiliently, let's say, than this air conditioning system? Autonomous, let's say.
Well, the way that a mammal would react is physiological, whereas the air conditioning is it's still programmed. What's the word I'm looking for? It's not physiological, I guess.
True. And now suppose we don't know what physiological means. Should we say more? Hmm. Tough. Now we're getting into where Maturana and Vedanta begin. I'm trying to think, what is it? What's more about an mammal?
is there perhaps something to do with what they distinguish, where an autopoietic system doesn't have inputs or outputs, whereas an allopoietic does. And a thermostat is kind of by definition an input output machine, that it's not internally regulating, there's some type of like
That's a good,
interface with an external system.
yeah, that's a very deep point, actually. This thing about inputs and outputs. And something actually I'm always a bit mystified by.
Yeah, I'm a bit curious about that too. And
Yeah.
especially when they say that you can look at autopoietic systems like an allopoietic system based off their input outputs, which I was confused about.
You know, can we bookmark this, because I have something to offer with respect to that, to Cameron's example, Cameron's point, which comes from a different book called The Tree of Knowledge. It's a submarine example. But if I forget, if you think I'm forgetting, just remind me. Say submarine, it'll kill me. Submarine. They have a nice
Submarine.
submarine, you know, like yellow submarine, submarine.
Okay.
They have a good example, all right, to illustrate that. Who else was talking about? In addition to the input-output issue, autopoietic. Well, you know, I'm just imagining that this thermostat system, it's designed very well, so it lasts for many years. But suppose it starts to break, you know, it can't repair itself, actually. And that's super interesting about an animal. I mean, animal within some limits, right? If it gets wounded, if it, you know, it can heal. If it gets hungry, it goes eat something, you know. And as a whole, this is vitality that actually repairs and maintains itself autonomously. Don't need to call in a repairman. If it's severely wounded, yes, of course, yeah. All right, so that's quite interesting. There's something about animals and well, plants, living things. So why don't we now we can think about the word system. I said living system, and that's kind of a crutch, because before modern times, people didn't, I mean, biologists and philosophers didn't, natural philosophers didn't think about creatures as systems in this kind of modern sense of the system, parts, connectors, right? Flows, like we were beginning at the beginning of the semester. But we can just use that, okay? I mean, after all, Matuana and Pareto were asking this question, in what sense is a machine? They said life is a machine, because they're deliberately taking a systems point of view, but they didn't mean mechanical. They just meant in terms of like thinking of organisms as parts and wholes and connections, relationships among parts. And when they say relationships, it's not physical, not just physical, okay? So let's take a look. Let me share screen. Find it. And jump to it. Maybe somebody already has this section marked out, but on page 79, 78, 79, do you see those red boxes? Okay, right. I mean, they're very careful writers, so they're pretty explicit. Right there, bang. Autopoietic machines are homeostatic machines. That's the word. Okay. But here's the thing. It's not just one thing that they maintain constant, like the temperature, which is the example that we have here in my room. There's more. So that's in the next page. And here, it actually helped me to diagram that sentence. Because every single word is important, every single word. But maybe I'll just narrate it colloquially rather than walk through their particular language. But I'm thinking there are parts, like it's always good to have a concrete example in mind when the reading's kind of tough. So like a body. And a body has parts, heart, lung, blood vessels, muscles. And then the parts reproduce themselves, maintain themselves, right? Over the organism's lifetime. We replace the cells, the muscles rebuild, the heart muscles rebuild. You know the saying that every cell in your body, right, in the course of 7 years, it's replaced. It's materially replaced. No cell in your body is the same as it was materially, like atom for atom, as what it was 10 years ago. I mean, 7 years ago. And yet, your body has some continuity to it, and your identity, even your memories have some sort of continuity to it. It's amazing, actually. Think about that. Amazing, that kind of continuity. So the parts maintain themselves and they continually replenish themselves. It's not like the heart stops and then bang, spawns a new, heart 2.0, right? It continually, this continuity is extremely important. What happens when somebody gets up and walks up the stairs in terms of the heart, lungs, blood, muscles? Just rough, coarsely, what's going on in terms of the processes of oxygenation, blood flow. What's going on when, let's say, I get up and walk up the stairs or run up the stairs? What changes?
Heart rate increases,
What else?
breathing.
Breathing rate increases, heart rate increases. What else changes? Importantly, in the muscles, oxygenation increases. The muscles demand more oxygen. They have to generate more power per unit time, right? So they need to actually metabolize, whether either it's sugars and fats or oxygen, a combination of them have to be metabolized to generate power. All right, basic stuff, the basic high school stuff, right? We all know this. The key thing here is everything's happening concurrently, right? And that means if my muscles start to exert more in order to maintain balance, in order to run up the stairs or whatever, they're calling for more oxygen, right? The blood has to deliver more oxygen per unit time. It has to get it from somewhere. So the lungs have to be delivering oxygen. So that means the heart has to be pumping more blood per unit time to the lungs, right? But you also have to have more oxygen in the lungs ready to osmose into the blood. So you have to be breathing faster, right? So that means relationships among those parts the parts are changing. The parts are changing in the processes, but the relationships among those parts has to remain invariant. That's in their paragraph here. Okay. So parts parts are organizationally constant, but materially can change. Okay, atom by atom. The relationships among them, their processes can't change over time, but the relationships among processes remains invariant. So in other words, if you look at an organism, it's not true that the organism's part doesn't change. Here in my phone, if the battery starts to get old, it's actually failing. Okay. But in an organism, parts can change. Parts do change, actually. Okay. That's just part of life. Okay. What doesn't, and even processes can change. If this CPU starts to work slower and slower, there's something wrong. Okay. But what doesn't change in living organism, in an autopoietic organism, is relationship among processes. Okay, there's 3 levels up. Parts, processes, relationships among processes. There's 3 levels up. That's where the invariance happens. Not at the part, not at the process, but at the relationships among makes process. Makes sense? All right. They should have put a diagram. Okay. So when you look at the discussion for this week, it would be really helpful maybe when you do your examples to first describe what the parts are, what the processes are, what the relationships are, and then say, okay, is there autopoietic or not? Okay, does this help? Okay, so let's move on. Let's move on. We have to, yeah, because there's some pretty radical consequences to how they're thinking about autopoietic organisms, which are just actually pretty striking if you just pause and think about it. On this page 85, share screen. It's pretty. Let me give you some context here. This was written back in the 80s, I think, or 90s. And these are Chilean scientists, both Humberto Maturana and his former student, Francisco Varela, were already really famous as biologists. And I think Maturana was an immunologist. He studied immunology and immune systems of animals. And Varela was studying neuroscience. He was looking at neuroscience. and he became a really important cognitive scientist in France after a while. But they both came out of they both studied in Chile and Harvard. So, but if you can if you know, I mean, Chile was and is a very Catholic country, okay, and um, and if you know anything about this kind of faith, this kind of church-based faith, matters of faith, uh, there's humans have a purpose, right? Which is, let's say, to do good, to aspire to some sort of moral condition. There's a notion of sin, right? And this kind of statement that life, that the teleonomy, which means purpose or goal, end state, is not, it can be disposed of. It was an extremely radical proposition. You used to get burned at the stake for saying things like that. Okay. Just want to give a sense of kind of the big idea shock that this was, like when it came out. So they're being very, very, very precise and very careful in their argument, in saying things here. And I don't know if some of you have looked at this section, but maybe if you have, maybe you can give a kind of ordinary language description, can maybe give an ordinary language description of what they're saying here, what they're proposing here. No. If we apply it to animals.
I mean, they're basically saying, well, they are saying that purpose does not provide any explanatory like value, that you cannot describe the system better by describing what its purpose or what it could be for, and that the purpose is external to the system itself, and because autopoiesis is all about internal processes and dynamics, that there's actually nothing like embedded inside of the system itself that offers something that could be perceived as purpose.
This internal is very important. Okay.
Yeah.
It's that idea of internal is really, really important. I mean, I'm trying to think of examples well, the way I put it when I was looking at the actual wet chemistry that they were doing, the wet metabolic work that they were doing, you can say that maybe if you dissect, let's say, the tissues of a frog, let's say, or you even look into the brain tissue, the nervous tissue of an animal brain, a frog, let's say, or suppose by magic you could actually do a live inspection of the chemistry, the neurochemistry of the frog. Its nervous system through the body and also in its central nervous system as it's hopping along, okay, or going for a fly. Let's take off the words here. So look at each other. Okay. If you look at the diffusion of the neurotransmitters through the tissues of the frog, going from synapses or crossing the gaps, synaptic gaps, or you measure, or you look at what's happening with electrical potential, the kind of natural signals that varying in the tissue of the frog. Nothing in those molecules, those molecules are not labeled saying fly, F-L-Y, right? Or the fly, if you look through the fly, there's nowhere in the signals, the neurochemistry, right? Or even the electrical potential, the changing voltages in the fly, its minuscule brain, that says fly swatter, right? In fact, and in me, if you're to look inside a human, in the flow of blood, the transmission, the diffusion of neurotransmitters inside my body, or even in my brain, if you open to look at it, there's no label on a molecule here or there that says 2010, trip with my daughter. There's no label, right? There's nowhere is it you will not see in my tissues, in my metabolism, labels, linguistic labels, like mama. Just doesn't occur here. You see what I mean?
I,
That's
I,
yeah.
oh.
Go ahead, please.
It just reminds me when I'm hearing this and reading this, I'm thinking about, the idea of which like form following function or function following form. And this seems to be like right in there, right? So that we're kind of decoupling that whole process, that thought about that, right?
Yeah. And also this idea about, they say description. I think Cameron mentioned this too, this thing about they're not saying there's no such thing as an aim. I mean, you can just say, look, I'm trying to the fly is trying to dodge the fly swatter. But they have a key statement in this other book called Tree of Knowledge, which is everything that is said by somebody. So who just made that statement? Xinwei,
Yeah.
Xinwei is trying to swat the fly, and I missed, right? And then I say the fly is dodging my fly swatter, but nothing in the tissue of the fly is doing fly swatter. You know what I mean? So that's the internal. And they say domain of description in that paragraph. That is, purpose and aims belong to the domain of description. It's part of the way that some other observer is giving account of what's going on.
That's kind of similar to evolution in the way we think about evolution, and it looks as though it looks very directed, it looks purposeful, but it's looking purposeful from the standpoint of being able to see back into the history of it, right?
Absolutely. And this is one of Stephen Jay Gould. Stephen Jay Gould is one of the great, writers about evolutionary biology. And he wrote books like The Panda's Thumb and The Flamingo's Smile, stuff like that. Really great titles. And he pointed out that, if you look at the evolution of creatures, it's actually a lot of, how was it? It's not the usual picture that there's kind of a line, ascent of man, so the ascent of man, so to speak, that converges on us, on me. It's more this amazing proliferation, the cacophony of literally millions of different kinds of organizations and organisms, and just many of them go extinct, and some persist. But what goes extinct is not driven by superior function; it's by an accident of not finding the right niche, or not, because the same organism could have done very well had there been a different set of environmental conditions for it. So it's not okay. So that's really one really important point. So it does so this kind of narration, that evolved to quote higher and higher life forms is exactly as Tanya was saying. It's a narrative that we give based on what we happen to have observed. All right. So it's a really profound point. Okay. Now, this thing about purpose and aim, they give a nice story for it. And I'll share that with you now. It's called, it's in the third book called Tree of Knowledge, and I'll share it with you. The Tree of Knowledge was written by commission. Let me see this. And you'll notice right away that it has pictures in it. It has diagrams, colorful inset boxes, cartoons, stuff like that. But it's very serious. It's a book commissioned by the Organization of American States, OAS, for business people in that time period who wanted to know a little bit about cutting edge science, so like complexity theory and this kind of stuff. So Maturana Varela wrote a popular, semi-popular book called Tree of Knowledge. And in this yellow paragraph, it's we're not gonna read this paragraph. I just want to point out where it is, page 160, 136, 37. But I'll tell you the story now in my own words. Basically, the story is this. Here's the parable. You have a submarine, okay, in the ocean, and there are two perspectives. First perspective is I'm a captain of a destroyer. I'm on the surface of the water. I'm looking down looking at the submarine as it turns left and right to kind of dodge some coral reef or dodge a cliff, let's say. That's what I see. Okay. Now, second point of view, I'm inside. Look, we are all inside the submarine. Okay, and we've been there all our lives. We've never been outside the submarine. Okay, this is our whole world. And in the submarine, we have the green scope that with the sonar it goes ping, 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 right? As the scope goes around. And you see the glowing green dots once in a while, right? Or glowing green regions on your scope. I also have a steering, I mean, a wheel, not a steering, just a wheel. I don't know it's steering, it's a wheel. And what we do is when I see a ping on the left side of the scope, I turn my wheel this way to the right. When I see a ping on the right side of the scope, I turn my wheel to the left. And I've been doing that all my life. Life goes on. In that account, I never mentioned coral reef, never mentioned, I don't know what a coral reef is, never mentioned cliff, never mentioned even ocean. I don't mention fish, you see? So that's their parable. The organism, which is the internal, organism of the submarine with all its little, parts and relationships just carries on without that linguistic description of coral reef, ocean, cliff, or even the notion of steering, because I don't see the rudder. It's outside my purview. So this is the parable for an organism. Okay, and I think now that you mentioned it, I think this is one way to understand this. It's a very confusing claim about, oh, an autopoietic organism doesn't have inputs or outputs, because from the point of view from the inside, everything's already inside, right? There's no outside. Makes sense?
It isn't the point of view, what, I don't understand point of view from the inside of a, like, what does that mean in the context of a, I mean, is it like, is there actual point of view or is it like a metaphorical point of view?
Oh, yeah, that's a good question. I misspoke. Okay, I should not say point of view. They say organization. In that paragraph, let me go back and look for it. Purposes, and this is page 85. Okay, I'll just read it out. Purposes or aims, they're not features of the organization of any machine. So they didn't say point of view. It was my mistake. Okay. In other words, features. So what? Oh, sorry. Organization. What does organization mean for Matarana and Beleda? It's how the parts of the organism relate to one another. Like the steering wheel is on this side of the scope, and the process is that if I see the green dot over here, I turn the wheel this way. That's those are kind of part of the dynamical organization of the organism. Whereas if I missed when I said when they say purpose or aim, or I say cliff, those are linguistic labels that belong to the domain of description, not organization. So yes, I could be somebody inside the ship, the submarine, and I came from the outside. So I was educated and trained outside. I climb into the submarine. I bring along those domains of description with me, and I can say blah blah blah. Yeah. But if you're just considering how the sub works, you see, okay, then there's no those descriptions just don't occur in the operation of the sub. Makes sense now? Better sense? For me, it was really, it really threw me for a loop, this thing about input output.
Yeah, I keep coming back to the thinking about thermostats. I think that's a really good analogy to work with here. And so if there's a thermostat inside of my organ, as a body, I have a thermostat. I get hot. I might get hot because it's hot out in the room that I'm in. But also I'm hot. So that's not There's an external factor there that is an input, but the thing that's adjusting my thermostat is my internal temperature, right? That's inside of me. It doesn't affect anything outside, and it's so yeah, something there.
Plus, another thing that throws me for a loop is that, hey, wait a minute, animals eat and drink and excrete. So what's that? Is that not input output? And I'm thinking now that maybe that's another reason why every word is important. Important. They say the word organization, and they distinguish organization from what they call structure. And here's the thing: it doesn't really matter, if we memorize organization versus structure, but the difference is the following. You have another example with toilet, just simple toilet bowl, with a container of water and cover and everything. It can be made of wood, or it can be made of porcelain, or it can be made of metal. Organization is relationship among the parts, so that when you twitch some switch or something, the water flushes. Doesn't matter if it's made of porcelain, steel, or wood. Okay, operationally, it works with certain set of mechanical relationships. So that's a distinct. Whereas structure, if I remember correctly, structure is what it's actually made of, stuff. Okay, so maybe you can think of it this way: eating, excreting, drinking, right? Taking energy in from the environment. That's more of a structural relationship. In fact, they have a word for it. It's called structural coupling. Structural coupling. The organisms, whether it's a paramecium with a little flagellum, tail and little mouth, eating things, or me, absolutely, we have a structural coupling with our ambient environment. Okay. Yeah, that's just because we're material, right? Beings. But organization is a holistic thing. Is that helpful? Maybe. Yeah.
So what do they mean then when they say you can treat an autopoietic system like an allopoietic system?
There, yeah, I was just gonna say go there too. That's a great point. And was it Tanya? I think somebody else was saying it seems like it depends on your point of view, doesn't it? Right? Because the submarine example, in the submarine, if I'm the captain of a surface ship destroyer, I see it, whatever, going after another ship, or I see it firing torpedo, or see it taking on fuel. So, so I have that from that point of view. It's not autonomous, really. It's not so autonomous.
These systems are nested as well, right? So you can, that's where there's a topology, right? Like we say, like, human being, and then we have it inside of that human being and outside of that human being. But then there might be that human being is nested inside a system that includes the human being and all the so we've been talking a lot about all the things that humans make and need. So then that actually bounds the system of human beings, right?
Yep, absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And this is what makes it super rich, because we have cells, which can be considered as autopoietic in some senses of self-autonomy, reproducing, but they're living inside the human body, right? So they do have some sort of, they're not, if you consider the exterior to an individual cell, then it's not autonomous. It actually functions in relationship to other cells and to the lymph system or whatever, hormones, right? So then that's a different point of view, though. No longer positioning ourselves in the cell itself. Now, people who have been over the last years, decades since this book came out, have been enormously influenced or inspired by this kind of thinking about living systems, and people ranging from architects to city planners to literary theorists to filmmakers to artists and engineers have been really influenced by this kind of thinking about autopoietic systems, autopoietic theory, also cognitive sciences too. And it's just the beginning. I mean, there's been a lot since then. All right, a lot of work since then, extending beyond this. Okay, I'm just giving you kind of like one of the main starting points for this kind of thinking. And another reason why I think it's interesting is that unlike computer science folks or ideas that came from computer science and from computer networks, right? They started from living things. So there are models for how systems hang together, how systems propagate or reproduce themselves versus reproducing another copy, which is like laying an egg and having a chicken come out. This kind of self-reproduction is, they drew all these from living beings, whereas we could have taken a different route. We could have taken the route of looking at a computer network or building a machine, like a car or a computer. And I believe that those kinds of models from mechanical engineering, electrical engineering, they are refined, but they're not as highly evolved actually as living systems, which have 3 billion year head start, maybe more, 3 billion years of head start of R&D. So maybe we could look at that more advanced R&D process. But also the models themselves are much richer, a lot richer. And we'll come to it. So any more questions or comments for today? I hope this is a good kickoff. All right. So I hope I'm encouraging you to look into this reading. All right.
I do have a.
Please.
I mean, they explicitly state that an autopoietic system that has a physical structure is life, and they're mutually implicative. And you're asking us to find a non-living autopoietic system. Exactly.
I say I respect them, but I don't have to be faithful, right? No, actually, no. To be serious, there was a debate. There is still a debate. There was a debate, in fact, between Maturana and Varela about the extent to which their theories could hold. All right. So some wanted to be very strict and say, no, this only applies to biology and only certain kinds of organisms. And others said, no, we can apply this to cities and corporations too. Okay. And what I think is that anything that we read, any theory that we look at, I like to take a pragmatic approach, which is say, what aspects of those accounts could yield different insights that I can use in understanding, making sense of, or designing or redesigning something else. So it's not like, is it true or not true application of a theory? It's not, but it has to hang together. It has to hang together. I mean, it's not just a random adoption of one buzzword. It's not like that. Okay, so that's what the exercise is about. How far can you take your understanding of what they mean by autopoiesis, and how far can you use it to give an account of something else that's not obviously a creature. Let's see what happens. And also accounts something that's not autopoietic. In what sense is some? You pick an example that's not autopoietic too. All right. How does it fail to be autopoietic? Okay. All right, good. I'm eager to see what you come up with. All right. And Cameron, you want to stay on so I can do the rescheduling then? And other folks, remember this Calendly. If you want to set a one-on-one, I'm happy to talk with you during my office hours. And if you can't make those office hours, then Sunday or Tuesday, we'll schedule something separately. Okay. All right. Bye-bye, everybody else. Okay. Bye-bye. Take care. All right. Let's take a look. Okay. Let me open up my calendar. I'm back in. Let's take a look here. Is it possible to actually use one of the subsequent Sunday or Tuesday slots?
I'm going to let's see, I might be able to do Sunday, let me check. But Tuesday I'm doing the Global Futures Conference.
Right. Let's see here. Sunday, what? Okay. Yeah, for me, that's 3 to sorry, that's noon Pacific, noon Arizona time, right? In that time period.
I'm on Eastern as well.
Oh, well, in that case, 3 p.m., 3 to 4:30.
Oh, you're free 3 to 4:30.
Well, that's what I have blocked off for
Okay.
cats.
Let's see. On the 17th. Okay, yeah. Let's do 3.
Okay, I'm put that down right now on the calendar. I'm putting it down manually into my calendar.
Sounds good.
That's good. If you have time, it's not really, let me just write this down. It's not absolutely necessary, but to avoid collisions, just,
Just put it on the,
calendar.
yeah, I can find it.
Yeah, yeah. I don't think anybody will collide, but just in case. And then I'll keep the phone numbers in place. But I will also copy the Zoom into that, so you'll see it in your calendar in a bit, okay?
Okay, great.
All right, good. So you're going to be attending the conference. So there's a Global Futures Conference. I heard there's something going on in New York. Is that where we're going to be?
Yeah. It's the 3 days Global Futures Conference in New
It's
York.
amazing lineup. There's an amazing lineup, actually,
Yeah,
with
yeah.
a lot of indigenous speakers, I believe,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
All right.
Yeah, it should be great.
All right.
Well, I just had a quick question of is there stuff that you recommend reading further based off this autopoiesis, especially like the more recent or contemporary work?
Yeah, maybe one of the most interesting recent works might be works by Donna Haraway. Have you
Yeah, I know, Donna.
yeah, so have you read already where she talks about what she calls symbiosis? Symbiosis?
Oh, I've heard the term before, but
Okay,
is it?
Poies. I think it's spelled like whoops, sorry. I'm putting to all everyone. I'm putting the chat. So I think it's spelled like that. Symbiosis. Symbioesis. Anyway, if you Google for that and Donna Haraway, you might find you will find where she writes about it. And basically, it's an elaboration where, see, whereas autopoiesis is about one organism at a time, symbiosis, I think, it's more like talking about how different autopoietic organisms can co-articulate with each other, and yet, also retain some sort of identity.
Is this the Staying with the Trouble book?
That one is a good book. Yeah, but I don't remember if it's in there or not. But I think it would make sense.
Okay. All right.
Yeah,
Sounds
so
good.
that's one rich source. Okay, and
Okay.
we'll talk soon.
Okay, thank you. All right, thank you.
Bye bye, Cameron.